Tonight, we'll take you on another quiet journey through time, into one of history's more brutal chapters, told gently so your mind can rest while the past unfolds. The Roman sun rises over the Seven Hills, casting long shadows across a city that smells like a combination of olive oil, human waste, and regret. You wake up in what the Romans generously call an insula, a tenement building that reaches toward the heavens with all the structural integrity of a house of cards in a windstorm. Your eyes open to the sound of your upstairs neighbour relieving himself into a clay pot, which he will shortly empty out the window. This is not an alarm clock you're accustomed to, but in Rome one adapts, or one dies. Usually the latter. The room you've rented, and room is being charitable, measures roughly 6 feet by 8 feet. The walls are thin enough that you can hear your neighbour's digestive troubles in startling detail. The floor is dirt, the ceiling sags ominously, and there's a suspicious stain in the corner that moves when you're not looking directly at it. You stumble to your feet, joints creaking from sleeping on what Romans call a bed, but what you might recognise as a wooden plank with delusions of grandeur. A thin mattress stuffed with straw provides about as much comfort as you'd expect from dried grass that's been home to several generations of mice. The morning light filters through a window that's essentially a hole in the wall. Glass is for the wealthy, and you, dear listener, are decidedly not wealthy. You're what Romans would call plebs, common people whose primary function is to exist in sufficient numbers to make the patricians feel superior. Breakfast awaits. And you've heard promising things about Roman cuisine. Surely a civilization that conquered the known world must have mastered the art of the morning meal. You make your way down the narrow, creaking stairs, past your neighbours who are already beginning their daily routines of survival. Mrs. Cassia from the 3rd floor is emptying her chamber pot out the window with the casual precision of long practice. She nods pleasantly as you pass, as if hurling human waste into the street is merely another form of morning greeting, which, in Rome, it essentially is. The ground floor of your building houses a small tavern, a taverna, where the proprietor, a stout man named Gaius with the complexion of old leather, is preparing what he assures you is food. The breakfast offering consists of a piece of bread that could reasonably be classified as a geological formation, some olives that have seen better centuries, and a cup of wine that's been so thoroughly diluted it's essentially flavoured water with commitment issues. Eggs? You ask hopefully, having heard that Romans are quite fond of them. Gaius stares at you as if you've just suggested roasting Jupiter himself. The other patrons, a collection of day labourers, petty criminals, and people whose occupations are best left unexamined, turn to regard you with the kind of suspicion typically reserved for barbarians and tax collectors. Eggs, Gaius repeats slowly, as if testing the word for dangerous magical properties. You want eggs. For breakfast. The concept appears to be revolutionary. In Rome, eggs are indeed eaten, but they're typically served at dinner, often as a first course accompanied by honey and wine. Suggesting eggs for breakfast is like suggesting that togas should be worn to the bathhouse, or that slaves should be paid. Technically possible, but socially catastrophic. You settle for the bread, which requires the jaw strength of a professional gladiator to consume. The olives are better, if you don't mind the occasional worm for protein. The Romans are surprisingly relaxed about sharing their food with insects. It's all part of nature's bounty, and who are they to discriminate against creatures who've clearly shown excellent taste in choosing such fine accommodations? The wine deserves special mention. Roman wine is an experience unto itself. This particular vintage has been watered down to the point where you suspect the grapes were merely shown to the liquid from a respectful distance. It tastes like disappointment, with notes of regret, and a finish that suggests the barrel may have been previously used to store fish sauce. But it's wet, it's alcoholic, and in Rome, those are the only qualifications that matter for breakfast beverages. As you struggle with your geological bread, you notice the water situation. The Romans are justly famous for their aqueducts, those magnificent engineering marvels that bring fresh water from distant mountains. What they're less famous for, because marketing wasn't invented yet, is what happens to that lovely mountain water once it reaches the city. By the time it arrives at your humble taberna, the water has been filtered through lead pipes, mixed with whatever's floating in the local wells, and seasoned with the accumulated wisdom of every person who's used the communal latrines upstream. The result is a liquid that's technically water in the same way that a gladiator's life is technically a career choice. You take a sip and immediately understand why Romans dilute their wine, not for taste, mind you, but for survival. The undiluted water has a flavor profile that suggests it's been personally blessed by every god of pestilence in the pantheon. Within an hour, your stomach begins to express its opinion of Roman cuisine. It starts as a gentle rumbling, like distant thunder on a summer evening. Then it progresses to what can only be described as your digestive system staging a full-scale revolt against the concept of nutrition. By mid-morning, you're making frequent trips to the public latrine, a communal affair that makes modern public restrooms look like sterile laboratories. The Roman toilet experience is fundamentally democratic. Everyone sits together on a long marble bench, with strategically placed holes, discussing the weather, politics, and their personal health situations, while nature takes its course. The toilet paper situation is particularly innovative. Romans use a sponge on a stick, the same sponge shared by everyone. Between uses, it's rinsed in a bucket of salt water that's changed with all the frequency of political reforms. The hygiene standards are what you might call optimistic. As the day progresses, you begin to understand that your digestive distress is not a temporary inconvenience, but rather your body's way of introducing itself to the local microbiology. Roman guts are hardened by years of exposure to bacteria that would send modern immune systems into existential crisis. Your modern digestive system, pampered by pasteurization and refrigeration, is essentially a tourist in a very hostile foreign country. The afternoon brings new delights. You venture outside and immediately understand why Romans burn incense in their homes. The streets smell like a combination of cooking food, human waste, animal waste, and the general aroma of 60,000 people living in close proximity without adequate sanitation. It's earthy, it's authentic, it's making your eyes water. Street vendors hawk their wares with the confidence of people who've never heard of food safety regulations. Hot sausages sizzle over questionable fires. Bread is sold from baskets that have clearly been home to several generations of mice, and fresh fruit displays its natural bruises with pride. Everything looks delicious, until you remember what happened to your stomach this morning. You spend the remainder of the day in what Romans call learning experiences, and what you might call systematic food poisoning. By evening, you've discovered muscles you didn't know you had, all of them cramping simultaneously. As darkness falls over the 7 hills, you drag yourself back to your insula, past the evening crowd of Romans who seem mysteriously unaffected by the day's nutritional adventures. They laugh, they drink, they consume street food with the casual confidence of people whose ancestors have been building immunity to local pathogens for generations. You collapse onto your wooden plank bed, listening to the sounds of the city settling in for the night. Somewhere in the distance, a drunk senator is singing off-key. A cat is having a territorial dispute with what sounds like a very small dragon. Your upstairs neighbour is emptying another chamber pot. And through it all, your stomach continues its philosophical debate with Roman cuisine. As you drift off to sleep, you can't help but wonder if this is how the empire really fell, not through barbarian invasions or political corruption, but through a collective case of food poisoning that finally reached critical mass. Tomorrow, you think drowsily, you'll try the public baths. Surely cleanliness will improve your situation. After all, what could possibly go wrong with communal bathing in ancient Rome? The rats in your walls seem to be laughing. The morning sun finds you in a sorry state. Your digestive system has spent the night engaged in what can only be described as interpretive dance, and you've gained a new appreciation for modern plumbing. The Romans, bless their engineering hearts, have given you communal toilets, communal dining, and now, as you're about to discover, communal bathing. The public baths, the thermae, are one of Rome's great social institutions. Every respectable Roman visits them daily, not just for cleanliness, but for networking, gossip, and what they optimistically call health treatments. You've heard they're magnificent, these palaces of marble and hot water, where citizens gather to discuss philosophy and politics while soaking in mineral-rich pools. What you haven't heard is that they're also magnificent breeding grounds for diseases that haven't been invented yet. You arrive at the local bathhouse in the early afternoon, when the sun has warmed the hypercost heating system to its full potential. The building is indeed impressive. Soaring ceilings, decorative mosaics, and the gentle sound of flowing water. It's like a spa, if spas were designed by people who thought germs were a Greek philosophical concept. The attendant at the entrance looks you up and down with the practiced eye of someone who's seen every possible variety of human decay. He quotes you a price that seems reasonable until you realize it's per hour, not per visit. Roman bathing is apparently a leisurely affair. You pay your sestertii and receive a small flask of olive oil and what appears to be a metal spatula. The attendant explains, in the patient tone reserved for obvious foreigners, that Romans don't use soap. Soap is for barbarians. Civilized people smear themselves with olive oil, then scrape it off with a spatula called a strigil, taking dead skin and accumulated grime along with it. This seems like an elegant solution until you realize that everyone uses the same olive oil, ladled from communal vats that have been seasoned with the accumulated skin cells of hundreds of previous bathers. It's recycling at its finest, assuming you're comfortable with recycling other people's epidermis. The bathhouse operates on a simple principle. You progress through a series of rooms, each hotter than the last, until you're thoroughly cooked. Then you plunge into cold water to seal in the flavor. It's like preparing yourself as a meal for whatever microscopic predators happen to be lurking in the pools. You begin in the apoditerium, the changing room, where Romans strip down with the casual confidence of people who've never heard of body shame. Clothes are folded and placed in small niches along the walls, watched over by slave attendants whose honesty is guaranteed by the threat of crucifixion. It's an effective security system, though perhaps a bit harsh for petty theft. The first bath is the frigidarium, the cold pool. Romans believe in shocking the system, and nothing shocks quite like plunging into water that's been chilled to approximately the temperature of a mountain stream in January. You enter carefully, trying to maintain dignity while your body experiences what can only be described as immediate and total revolt. The other bathers watch your reaction with amusement. Cold water is apparently character building, like military service or tax collection. Romans pride themselves on their tolerance for discomfort, having built an empire on the principle that suffering builds character and conquers nations. Next comes the tepidarium, the warm room, where your body slowly remembers how to function. The water here is heated by the hypercast system, a marvel of engineering that channels hot air through hollow walls and floors. It's brilliant, efficient, and has been warming the same water for longer than anyone cares to calculate. You notice that the water has a certain thickness to it. Not quite soup, but definitely more substantial than regular water. It's been enriched by contributions from hundreds of daily bathers, each adding their own personal blend of skin oils, dead cells, and whatever exotic diseases they've picked up in their travels across the empire. The Romans around you seem perfectly comfortable in this bacterial stew. They're discussing politics, always a safe topic in the late Republic, and comparing notes on their various ailments. Marcus has developed an interesting rash after his recent trip to Egypt. Flavius is showing off what appears to be the early stages of some sort of fungal infection. Gaius has a suspicious lump that he's convinced is a gift from the gods. You try to join the conversation, but your voice cracks as you realize that several of your fellow bathers have open wounds that are currently marinating in the communal water. Romans are surprisingly casual about personal injury. A sword cut from gladiator training, a bite from an exotic pet, a mysterious ulcer from unknown causes. All are considered conversation starters rather than reasons to avoid public bathing. The caldarium, the hot room, is where things become truly interesting. The water here approaches the temperature of a gentle simmer, and the air is thick with steam that carries the concentrated essence of everyone who sweated here in the past week. It's like being inside a human soup kettle, which is a more accurate description than you'd prefer. You settle into the hot water, trying to look relaxed while your skin begins to resemble a boiled lobster. The heat is actually rather pleasant, once you get past the concern that you're essentially poaching yourself in other people's bodily fluids. Romans consider this therapeutic. They believe hot water draws out impurities and bad humours from the body. What it actually draws out, you realise with growing alarm, is your body's natural defences against infection. Your pores are opening like tiny doorways, cheerfully welcoming whatever microscopic visitors happen to be floating by. You're becoming a vacation resort for bacteria that have been looking for new accommodations. A helpful fellow bather offers to scrape your back with his strigil. This is considered friendly assistance, though you notice his strigil has clearly been used on several other people today without benefit of cleaning. Roman social customs prioritize politeness over hygiene, which explains a great deal about Roman history. You politely decline and attempt to scrape yourself, which is like trying to perform surgery with a spoon while blindfolded. The strigil removes impressive quantities of dead skin and olive oil, along with what you hope is just accumulated dirt. The scrapings fall into the bathwater, where they become someone else's problem. By the time you've completed the full circuit of pools, you're thoroughly clean in the Roman sense of the word. Your skin is pink and tender, your pores are wide open, and you've absorbed approximately a pint of water that's been personally blessed by half the population of Rome. The massage comes next. Roman masseurs are vigorous professionals who believe in the therapeutic value of pummeling their clients into submission. Your masseur, a muscular individual named Brutus with arms like tree trunks, approaches the task with the enthusiasm of someone who's spent his morning kneading bread dough. He works with oils that smell suspiciously like rancid fish and dead flowers. Romans have strong opinions about aromatherapy, most of them involving ingredients that would be classified as biological weapons in later centuries. The massage itself is thorough, professional, and leaves you feeling like you've been worked over by a team of enthusiastic construction workers. As evening approaches, you emerge from the bathhouse feeling refreshed, relaxed, and oddly itchy. The Roman bathing experience is complete, and you've successfully integrated yourself into one of the empire's great social traditions. Walking home through the darkening streets, you notice that your skin has developed an interesting tingling sensation. It's probably just the after effects of the hot water and vigorous scraping. Romans are famous for their healthy complexions, which they attribute to regular bathing and Mediterranean living. By the time you reach your insula, the tingling has progressed to what might generously be called advanced itching. Your skin has taken on a rosy glow that's either the mark of good health or the first sign of something that hasn't been properly classified yet. You spend the evening scratching thoughtfully and pondering the Roman approach to wellness. Tomorrow, you decide, you'll explore the city properly. Perhaps a nice walk through the forums, maybe some shopping in the markets. Nothing too strenuous. As you drift off to sleep, you can hear your upstairs neighbour coughing in a way that suggests his recent bathhouse visit was equally successful. The rats in your walls seem to be having a party, which is probably unrelated to your bathing experience, but adds a festive atmosphere to the evening. Your skin continues its interpretive dance throughout the night, and you dream of cool, clean water that hasn't been personally blessed by the ancient world. In the morning, you'll discover what Romans call the bathhouse rash, though they prefer to think of it as a sign that the treatments are working. Your third day in Rome begins with the discovery that your skin has developed what Romans cheerfully call bathing spots, a collection of red, itchy patches that suggest yesterday's spa experience was more successful than anticipated. But Romans are a hardy people, and a little rash never killed anyone, at least not immediately. You decide to explore the city properly, to see the famous forums and markets, perhaps purchase some souvenirs to remember your visit. What could be more pleasant than a leisurely stroll through the heart of the greatest empire in the world? You step out into the Roman morning, which greets you with its usual symphony of commerce, construction, and creative profanity. The streets are already crowded with citizens going about their daily business of survival, social advancement, and avoiding stepping in things that are better left unidentified. The Roman street layout is what you might charitably call organic. Streets wind and curve with the spontaneous logic of goat paths, which is essentially what they once were. There are no street signs because Romans navigate by landmark and instinct. Turn left at the wine shop with the purple door, continue past the altar to Minerva, then follow the smell of baking bread until you reach the fountain with the lewd graffiti. You're admiring a particularly impressive example of Roman engineering, an aqueduct that soars overhead carrying thousands of gallons of fresh water, when you accidentally bump into someone. It's a minor collision, the sort of thing that happens in crowded places everywhere. You immediately offer what you consider a polite apology. "Sorry," you say, with the automatic courtesy of modern civilization. This turns out to be a mistake. The person you've bumped into is not just anyone. He's a slave belonging to Senator Marcus Crassus Dives, one of Rome's wealthiest and most influential citizens. The slave is running an errand for his master, carrying a scroll that probably contains something terribly important, like tax records or a shopping list for the next orgy. The slave stares at you with the expression of someone who's just witnessed something deeply shocking. Around you, other pedestrians have stopped to observe what's clearly becoming a situation. In Rome, public scenes are free entertainment, and crowds gather with the enthusiasm of people who don't have television. "You apologize," the slave says slowly, as if testing the words for dangerous magic. This is your second mistake. Romans don't apologize to slaves. Ever. Apologizing to a slave implies that slaves are people deserving of consideration, which is a revolutionary concept that could undermine the entire foundation of Roman society. It's like suggesting that women should vote, or that taxes should be reasonable. Technically possible, but socially catastrophic. The crowd murmurs with interest. Someone points out that you're clearly a barbarian, which explains everything. Someone else suggests you might be drunk, which would excuse the behavior. A third person notes that you're wearing clothes that don't quite fit properly, marking you as either very poor or very foreign, possibly both. The slave, meanwhile, is in a difficult position. His master's honor has been insulted by your inappropriate courtesy, but you're clearly not a Roman citizen, which means the normal procedures for dealing with insults don't quite apply. It's a legal grey area that Romans handle with typical efficiency. When in doubt, assume the worst and act accordingly. Within minutes, you find yourself at the center of a growing crowd that's debating your status, your sanity, and your probable country of origin. Romans are enthusiastic amateur anthropologists, and they're making creative guesses about your heritage based on your clothing, your accent, and your disturbing tendency to treat slaves like human beings. "Definitely a Gaul," announces someone with authority. "Look at that posture, classic barbarian stance." No, argues another expert. "The way he moves his hands when he talks, that's clearly Germanic, probably from one of those tribes that wear animal skins and worship trees." "Could be British," suggests a third voice. "They're supposed to be odd about social customs. I heard they paint themselves blue and sacrifice druids to the moon." You try to explain that you're simply a visitor trying to see the sights, but this only makes things worse. Your accent marks you as definitively foreign, and your explanation sounds suspiciously like the kind of cover story a spy might use. Romans are naturally suspicious of foreigners, having conquered most of them at one point or another. The situation escalates when someone throws a rotten apple. It's not aimed with particular malice. Romans throw things at public entertainments as a matter of course. But it strikes you in the shoulder with the wet splat of produce that's seen better days. The crowd cheers appreciatively. This encourages further audience participation. Soon you're dodging a creative assortment of overripe vegetables, small stones, and what appears to be a deceased fish that someone has been saving for just such an occasion. Romans are resourceful people, and they hate to waste good ammunition. You decide that retreat is the better part of valor and begin making your way toward what looks like a side street. The crowd follows with the enthusiasm of people who've stumbled onto unexpected entertainment. Street theatre is always popular in Rome, especially when it involves actual danger to the performers. The side street turns out to be more of an alley, narrow and winding between tall buildings that block out most of the sunlight. Roman alleys are atmospheric places, rich with shadows and the accumulated wisdom of centuries of urban living. They're also excellent places to be robbed, murdered, or both. You've barely entered the alley when you're greeted by three individuals whose professions, while not explicitly stated, are clearly related to the redistribution of wealth. They have the lean, efficient look of people who've made careers out of other people's misfortune. "Welcome to Rome," says the leader, a thin man with scars that suggest an interesting personal history. "Lovely morning for a walk, isn't it?" His companions spread out to block your retreat, moving with the practiced coordination of people who've done this before, many times, recently. "Your sandals," the leader continues conversationally. "They look comfortable, well made, probably expensive." You explain that they're actually quite cheap, practically worthless, certainly not worth stealing. This is another mistake. Romans respect honesty, but they also respect property, and admitting that your possessions are worthless suggests that you might be a terrible judge of value. Or worse, poor. Modesty, observes one of the accomplices. I like that in a victim. The robbery proceeds with business-like efficiency. Romans are professional about everything, including crime. Your sandals are indeed removed, along with your belt, your cloak, and what little money you're carrying. The thieves are polite about it, almost apologetic. They're not trying to hurt you, they explain. They're simply working professionals doing their jobs. Nothing personal, the leader assures you as they examine your possessions with the critical eye of people who know their merchandise. It's just business. Supply and demand. You have supplies, we have demands. They leave you with your basic clothing and your dignity, though the latter is somewhat worse for wear. Roman thieves are practical people who understand that completely destitute victims make poor repeat customers. They prefer to think of robbery as a form of taxation, unpleasant but necessary for the smooth functioning of society. You emerge from the alley barefoot, dishevelled, and considerably wiser about Roman urban customs. The original crowd has dispersed, having found new entertainment elsewhere in the city. Romans have short attention spans for public spectacles unless blood is involved, and your performance lacked the dramatic flair they've come to expect from street theatre. The rest of the afternoon is spent learning about Roman law enforcement. The vigiles, Rome's combination police force and fire brigade, are busy with what Romans consider real crimes: arson, murder, and insurrection. Petty theft falls into the category of natural disasters, like earthquakes and floods, unfortunate but not really preventable. You report your robbery to a vigil, who listens with the patient expression of someone who's heard this story many times today. He explains that Roman justice operates on the principle of personal responsibility. If you didn't want to be robbed, you shouldn't have walked down a dark alley while obviously being foreign and insufficiently armed. Good lesson, he concludes cheerfully. You'll know better next time. As evening approaches, you find shelter in a wine shop that doubles as a tavern, brothel, and informal courthouse for settling minor disputes. The proprietor, a woman named Livia with arms like a gladiator and a vocabulary that would make a centurion blush, takes pity on your obviously foreign helplessness. She provides you with a cup of wine that's stronger than yesterday's vintage and a bowl of what she claims is stew. The stew contains ingredients that you choose not to identify too closely, but it's warm and probably nutritious. The olives floating on top have the inevitable worms, but you're beginning to understand that Romans consider this a protein supplement rather than a contamination. First week in Rome? Livia asks, with the knowing smile of someone who's seen countless foreigners learn about Roman hospitality. You nod, too exhausted for detailed conversation. It's easier, she assures you, or you die. Usually one or the other happens pretty quickly. As you sit in the tavern, listening to the evening sounds of the city, distant music, closer arguments, and what sounds like someone being enthusiastically murdered in a nearby alley, you reflect on Roman urban life. It's vibrant, dynamic, and educational. Mostly it's educational about things you never wanted to learn. Tomorrow, you decide, you'll be more careful. You'll avoid crowds, stay away from alleys, and definitely not apologize to anyone. Romans clearly have different standards for social interaction, and adaptation is the key to survival. The wine is helping with the day's accumulated stress, and the warmth of the tavern is pleasant after the shock of outdoor robbery. You're beginning to understand why Romans are so fond of their public spaces. When your home is a small room in a crumbling building, anywhere else feels luxurious by comparison. As the evening progresses, you notice that several of your fellow patrons are engaged in activities that would be considered questionable in more civilized circumstances, but this is Rome, where questionable activities are often the most interesting ones, and civilization is a relative concept anyway. You fall asleep at your table, lulled by the wine, the warmth, and the gentle sounds of Romans conducting business in the colourful language they've perfected over centuries of empire building. Tomorrow will bring new adventures in Roman living. Tonight at least, you're warm, fed, and only slightly robbed. You wake on your fourth morning in Rome with the distinct feeling that the gods are personally interested in your welfare. Not in a good way, the kind of interest that typically precedes plagues, natural disasters, or involuntary participation in religious ceremonies. This feeling is confirmed when you step outside and discover that today is a festival day. Romans have more festivals than they have common sense, which is saying something for a people who conquered the known world through superior organization and tactical innovation. Every god, goddess, and minor deity has at least one special day, and often several, because divine beings are apparently quite needy when it comes to attention. Today's celebration is in honor of Jupiter Optimus Maximus, the king of the gods and Rome's personal patron deity. Jupiter is having one of his major festivals, which means the entire city has declared a holiday from work, common sense, and sobriety. The streets are filled with Romans in their best togas, carrying flowers, incense, and the sort of cheerful expressions that suggest they started celebrating quite early in the morning. You follow the crowd toward the Forum Romanum, where the main religious ceremonies will take place. Romans take their religious duties seriously, understanding that proper worship ensures divine favor, while improper worship results in plague, famine, military defeat, and other forms of cosmic disapproval. The Temple of Jupiter sits atop the Capitoline Hill, like a marble wedding cake designed by committee. It's magnificent, imposing, and currently surrounded by enough incense smoke to require its own weather system. The steps leading up to the temple are crowded with worshippers, priests, and various animals that seem nervous about their immediate future. At the base of the temple steps, a crowd has gathered around the day's main event, the sacrifice of a bull to ensure Jupiter's continued blessing on the Roman state. Bulls are expensive offerings, which demonstrates the seriousness of Roman piety. This particular bull is a magnificent specimen, pure white and adorned with ribbons, garlands, and the sort of decorations that suggest someone has put considerable effort into making him look festive before his appointment with eternity. You position yourself in the crowd, trying to blend in with the worshippers while maintaining a safe distance from the proceedings. Romans are enthusiastic about their religious festivals, and enthusiasm can be dangerous when it involves sharp knives and large animals. The ceremony begins with prayers, incantations, and the sort of formal religious language that sounds impressive even when you don't understand what it means. The priest, resplendent in robes that cost more than most Romans earn in a year, approaches the bull with the confidence of someone who's done this before, many times. The bull, for his part, seems less enthusiastic about the proceedings. He's clearly been briefed on his role in the ceremony, and he has opinions about it, strong opinions, expressed through vigorous head-shaking and what sounds suspiciously like bovine profanity. The actual sacrifice, when it happens, is swift and professional. Romans are practical about their religious obligations, understanding that divine favor is best secured through efficient technique rather than dramatic presentation. The priest wields his knife with the practiced skill of someone who's carved up more livestock than most professional butchers. This is where things become interesting. The blood from the sacrifice, quite a lot of blood as it turns out, sprays in directions that Roman engineering hadn't entirely anticipated. Some of it lands on the altar, which is traditional and appropriate. Some of it lands on the priests, which is expected and considered lucky. Some of it lands on you, which is unexpected and apparently significant. The crowd around you draws back, as if you've suddenly developed a contagious disease. Romans are superstitious people who believe that everything happens for a reason, and that reason is usually divine intervention. When bull's blood spontaneously decorates a foreign visitor during a religious ceremony, the gods are clearly sending a message. The question is, what kind of message? The priest pauses in his ritual duties to examine you with the critical eye of someone who's spent his career interpreting divine communications. You're standing there, decorated with sacred bull's blood, looking like either a chosen vessel of the gods or someone who's about to become the main course at the next sacrifice. Interesting, the priest murmurs, which is not what you want to hear from religious professionals in the middle of their ceremonies. He calls over several colleagues for consultation. Roman priests approach divine interpretation with the methodical thoroughness they apply to engineering projects. They examine the blood spatter pattern, discuss the angle of spray, and debate the theological implications of foreign visitors being decorated by sacrificial animals during major festivals. The crowd watches with the fascination of people who've stumbled onto unexpected entertainment. Romans enjoy a good omen reading, especially when it involves someone else's potential doom. It's like reality television, but with more religious significance. After considerable professional discussion, the priests reach a preliminary conclusion. The gods have noticed you. This is either very good news or very bad news, but definitely significant news. Jupiter doesn't randomly decorate foreigners with bull's blood unless he has plans for them. To determine the exact nature of divine interest, they decide to consult the entrails. This is standard Roman procedure for clarifying ambiguous omens. The bull's internal organs are examined, with the same careful attention that modern doctors apply to medical diagnostics, except with more religious implications and less hygiene. The liver, in particular, receives detailed scrutiny. Roman priests are accomplished hepatic analysts who can read divine messages in organ configurations the way modern people read newspapers. Your fate, apparently, is written in bovine liver tissue. "Cloudy," announces the head priest after careful examination. "Definitely cloudy, with possible precipitation." This is interpreted to mean that your future contains uncertainty, which is either profound wisdom or obvious statement, depending on your perspective. The priests recommend immediate purification rituals to clarify divine intentions and ensure that whatever the gods have planned for you happens under favorable circumstances. Roman purification rituals are thorough affairs that combine religious symbolism with practical medicine and public entertainment. You're escorted to a nearby shrine where a junior priest begins the process of making you acceptable to the gods. The ritual involves water, lots of water, applied enthusiastically to every part of your person, while prayers are chanted and incense burned. Roman purification is comprehensive, addressing not just spiritual contamination, but also physical dirt, moral failings, and personal hygiene issues that might offend divine sensibilities. Next comes the application of sacred oils, herbs, and what appears to be ash from previous sacrifices. You're anointed with substances that smell like a combination of flowers, smoke, and things that have been dead for longer than optimal. Romans believe in using every available resource for religious purposes, including ingredients that other cultures might classify as waste products. The ceremony reaches its climax when you're required to participate in a ritual blessing that involves public nudity, chicken sacrifice, and what the Romans euphemistically call purification through correction. This last element turns out to be a ceremonial spanking administered by the priest with a bundle of sacred twigs while the crowd chants prayers for your spiritual improvement. Romans are surprisingly comfortable with public displays of religious enthusiasm, and your purification ceremony draws an appreciative audience. Citizens passing by stop to watch, offer commentary, and occasionally throw flowers or small coins as tokens of encouragement. Street performers gather to learn new techniques from the priests, and vendors set up small stands to sell refreshments to the crowd. By the time the purification is complete, you're spiritually cleansed, physically exhausted, and publicly humiliated in the most religious way possible. The priests pronounce you acceptable to the gods, though they recommend regular follow-up ceremonies to maintain your improved spiritual condition. You spend the rest of the day wandering through Rome's festival celebrations, still slightly damp from your purification and smelling like a combination of sacred oils and disappointed chicken. Romans nod approvingly when they see you, recognizing the signs of recent religious attention. You've been blessed by the gods, which makes you either very lucky or marked for interesting times. The festival continues into the evening, with music, dancing, and the sort of public celebrations that Roman authorities encourage, because happy citizens are less likely to organize rebellions. You participate as best you can, though your earlier religious experience has left you cautious about drawing divine attention. As night falls over the 7 hills, you make your way back to your insula, past Romans who are still celebrating with the determined enthusiasm of people who take their religious obligations seriously. Festival days are important in Rome, marking the rhythms of religious life and providing regular opportunities for community celebration, divine worship, and public intoxication. You fall asleep to the sounds of continued festivities, wondering what tomorrow will bring. The gods have noticed you, the priests have purified you, and you've survived another day of Roman cultural education. In your dreams, you're chased by sacred chickens while Jupiter laughs from Mount Olympus and throws lightning bolts that smell suspiciously like sacrificial incense. Tomorrow, you suspect, will bring new opportunities for divine intervention in your daily life. Your 5th morning in Rome begins with what Romans call opportunity knocking. In your case, opportunity takes the form of 3 large men with official-looking scrolls. and the sort of professional demeanour that suggests they're not here to discuss philosophy. "Greetings, citizen," says their leader, a man whose muscles suggest he's been personally acquainted with hard labour for most of his natural life. "I am Marcus Brutus Workibus, foreman of public construction for this district. You look healthy." This is not a compliment. In Rome, looking healthy when you're obviously poor and foreign is suspicious. Healthy poor people are expected to contribute to society through manual labour, military service, or other forms of character-building physical exertion. "We have need of workers," Workibus continues, consulting his scroll with the careful attention of someone who's learned to read but still finds it challenging. "The Great Aqueduct project requires strong backs and willing hands. You appear to possess both." You attempt to explain that you're merely a visitor, interested in Roman culture and architecture, certainly not seeking employment in construction. This explanation is received with the sort of polite skepticism that Romans reserve for obvious lies and political promises. "Foreign labour," observes one of Workibus's assistants. "Excellent. Foreign workers have fewer legal protections, which simplifies the paperwork. Roman bureaucracy operates on principles of efficiency and practicality. Complicated legal situations involving citizen rights, worker protections, and fair treatment create administrative headaches that slow down important projects. Foreign workers lacking citizenship and political connections represent streamlined human resources that can be deployed with minimal paperwork." Before you can mount a proper protest, you find yourself conscripted into the Roman Public Works program. "It's not technically slavery," the foreman explains cheerfully, "because you'll be paid, eventually, when the project is complete, and the budget allows for worker compensation. Think of it as an investment in Roman infrastructure," Workibus suggests, as his assistants escort you toward the construction site. "Your labour will benefit generations of Romans yet unborn. That's the kind of legacy most people can only dream of." The construction site is located on the outskirts of the city, where Roman engineers are building the next phase of their magnificent aqueduct system. These engineering marvels bring fresh mountain water to the growing metropolis, ensuring that Romans have access to clean drinking water, public baths, and elaborate fountain displays that demonstrate their mastery over nature. What the engineers don't mention is that building aqueducts requires moving approximately half a mountain, one stone at a time, using human labour and the sort of primitive equipment that makes simple tasks feel like heroic endeavours. You're assigned to a work crew composed of other volunteers, a collection of foreign visitors, runaway slaves, debtors, and people who've made poor decisions involving Roman officials. Your crew leader is a weathered individual named Gaius Maximus Paenius, whose nickname the Rock Breaker was earned through decades of intimate acquaintance with stone construction. "Welcome to paradise," Paenius announces with the cheerful sarcasm of someone who's found humour in hopeless situations. "Today we'll be moving stones that weigh more than small buildings from the quarry to the construction site. The distance is approximately 5 miles, the terrain is uphill both ways, and the stones have personal grudges against being moved." Roman construction techniques are marvels of engineering efficiency. Large stones are quarried from local hillsides using techniques that combine careful planning, precise measurement, and hitting things with hammers until they break into useful sizes. The broken stones are then transported to construction sites using wooden rollers, rope systems, and large numbers of people who've been volunteered for the experience. Your first assignment involves quarrying, which Romans have elevated to an art form. You're provided with a hammer, a chisel, and instructions to remove stone blocks of specific dimensions from a cliff face that appears to have been designed by geography as a practical joke. "The secret," explains your quarrying partner, a small Greek man named Archimedes Suphrius, "is to hit the stone harder than it hits you back." Roman engineering at its finest. The hammer is heavier than it looks, the chisel is duller than promised, and the stone has clearly been reinforced by divine intervention. You spend the morning learning that Roman construction work is primarily an exercise in applied stubbornness. The stones don't want to break in the right places, the tools don't want to work efficiently, and your body doesn't want to perform labour that it wasn't designed for. By midday you've successfully quarried one block that meets Roman specifications, though successfully might be overstating the achievement. The block is roughly the right size, approximately the correct shape, and only slightly cracked in places that might be structurally significant. "Excellent work," Paenius observes with the generous praise of someone who's seen much worse. You're showing real potential for stone activities. The midday break provides an opportunity to experience Roman workplace nutrition. Lunch consists of bread that's marginally softer than the stones you've been breaking, water that's been sitting in clay pots since morning, and what Romans optimistically call cheese, but what you might recognize as milk, that's achieved independence through fermentation. The afternoon brings new challenges. Stone transportation. Roman engineers have developed sophisticated systems for moving heavy objects using simple machines, human labor, and the sort of creative problem-solving that built an empire. Your job is to be part of the human labor component. Stone blocks are loaded onto wooden sleds that slide along wooden rollers, pulled by teams of workers using rope systems that distribute the weight efficiently, in theory. In practice, moving stones involves a great deal of shouting, creative profanity, and the occasional injury when rope systems fail in spectacular ways. Your transportation team consists of 8 workers pulling stones that weigh approximately as much as small houses. The route from quarry to construction site follows ancient paths that wind through Roman countryside, with the sort of scenic beauty that you're too exhausted to appreciate. The trick, gasps Suffrius as you strain against the ropes, is to pull harder than the stone wants to stay put. Physics is just applied determination. Roman workers are accomplished at finding motivation in desperate circumstances. They sing work songs that combine rhythm with profanity, tell stories about mythical construction projects that were even worse than current assignments, and maintain the sort of dark humor that keeps people functional when their situation is objectively horrible. The stones, for their part, seem actively opposed to being moved. They catch on every obstacle, resist every change of direction, and occasionally break free from their restraints to roll back down hills that you've just spent hours climbing. By late afternoon, your hands are bleeding, your back is screaming protests in languages you didn't know it spoke, and your skin has achieved the sort of bronze coloration that Romans associate with honest labor and skin cancer. The sun beats down with the intensity of a divine spotlight, and Romans work through the heat with the determined endurance of people who've conquered most of the known world through superior stubbornness. Character building, Paeanius observes as you collapse during a brief rest break. Romans believe that suffering creates virtue. The more you suffer, the more virtuous you become. It's very philosophical. The workday ends when the sun sets, not because the work is finished, but because Romans have discovered that construction accidents increase dramatically in darkness. You drag yourself back to the work camp, a collection of temporary shelters where Roman construction workers recover from their daily encounters with stone, gravity, and engineering challenges. Dinner is provided by the Roman Public Works Administration, which has developed cost-parameter nutrition programs that meet the minimum requirements for keeping workers alive. The meal consists of grain porridge that's been enriched with whatever protein sources were readily available, vegetables that have achieved interesting new colors through creative storage methods, and wine that's been diluted to approximately the strength of flavored water. Tomorrow, announces Paeanius as workers settle in for the night, we start on the foundation work, much more interesting than quarrying. Foundation work involves digging holes that are deeper than you are tall, then filling them with stones that are heavier than you can lift, Roman engineering at its most creative. You fall asleep on a straw mattress that's marginally more comfortable than sleeping on bare ground, listening to the sounds of Roman workers recovering from their educational day. Someone is snoring in harmonies that suggest serious nasal obstruction. Someone else is coughing in a way that indicates interesting respiratory developments. A third worker is grinding his teeth with the mechanical precision of a stone mill. Your body has achieved new levels of comprehensive exhaustion. Muscles you didn't know you possessed are sending complaints to your central nervous system in the sort of detail typically reserved for medical emergencies. Your hands have developed calluses on top of calluses, and your skin has been seasoned by sun, sweat, and stone dust until it resembles well-used leather. In your dreams, you're chased by stone blocks, while Roman engineers shout helpful advice about proper lifting techniques. The stones roll uphill, defying physics with the casual confidence of supernatural entities, while you try to explain that you're really more of an intellectual type, better suited to contemplative activities than manual labor. Tomorrow will bring new opportunities to contribute to Roman infrastructure development. Tonight, at least, you're horizontal, stationary, and temporarily free from the tyranny of moving heavy objects across impossible distances. The Roman work ethic you've discovered is both admirable and potentially fatal. Your sixth morning in Rome arrives with a sort of official announcement that makes even experienced Romans nervous. A herald appears in the construction camp shortly after dawn, unrolling a scroll with the ceremonial flourish that Romans reserve for important proclamations, bad news, and tax assessments. By order of the Senate and people of Rome, the herald announces, in the carrying voice of someone who's delivered unwelcome news professionally for years, all able-bodied men in this district are hereby conscripted for immediate military service in defense of the Republic. This is what Romans call opportunity for glory. You might call it compulsory participation in organized violence, but Romans prefer their terminology to sound more inspiring. The herald continues reading from his scroll, which details the military situation with typical Roman efficiency. Rome is at war, which is not particularly unusual since Rome has been at war with someone almost continuously for the past 5 centuries. What makes this conflict special is that it involves Romans fighting other Romans, which always creates interesting tactical challenges. The forces of Pompey Magnus require reinforcement, the herald explains. All conscripts will be equipped, trained, and deployed to active service areas within 3 days. Failure to report for duty is punishable by crucifixion, exile, or creative combinations thereof. Roman military recruitment operates on the principle that enthusiasm is optional, but participation is mandatory. The Republic has discovered that voluntary military service doesn't provide sufficient personnel for maintaining an empire that spans from Britain to Egypt, so they've developed conscription systems that ensure adequate staffing levels for their various military adventures. You attempt to explain that you're not actually a Roman citizen, merely a tourist who's become inadvertently involved in construction work, through what might charitably be called a misunderstanding. This explanation is received with the sort of patient attention that Romans reserve for obvious attempts at draft dodging. Or an auxiliary, the conscription officer notes, making marks on his tablet with the methodical thoroughness of someone who's processed thousands of reluctant recruits. Excellent. Foreign soldiers have fewer legal protections, which simplifies the administration of military justice. The Roman military organization is a marvel of efficiency that has conquered most of the known world through superior logistics, tactical innovation, and the willingness to conscript anyone who can hold a weapon without immediately injuring themselves. Your obvious lack of military experience is considered an asset rather than a liability, since untrained soldiers can be molded according to Roman military standards without the inconvenience of unlearning bad habits. Within hours, you find yourself at a military camp outside Rome, surrounded by other reluctant conscripts who've been gathered from across the Republic's various territories. Your fellow soldiers represent a cross-section of Roman diversity: farmers from Gaul, merchants from Greece, fishermen from Spain, and artisans from dozens of provinces who've all discovered that Roman citizenship comes with certain non-negotiable obligations. The camp commandant, Centurion Marcus Disciplinus Hartius, addresses the new recruits with the sort of motivational speech that Romans have perfected over centuries of military expansion. "Welcome to the Roman army," Hartius announces, with the cheerful authority of someone who spent his career transforming civilians into soldiers. "You are now part of the finest military organization in human history. This is either the greatest honor of your lives or the last mistake you'll ever make, possibly both." Roman military training is designed to transform ordinary citizens into disciplined soldiers through a combination of physical conditioning, weapons instruction, and psychological preparation. The process is thorough, efficient, and occasionally fatal for recruits who prove unsuited to military life. Your training begins immediately with weapons familiarization. You're issued a gladius, a short sword that Romans have used to conquer the world through superior metalwork and aggressive application. The gladius is perfectly balanced, expertly crafted, and completely foreign to your modern sensibilities about conflict resolution. The gladius, explains your weapons instructor, a scarred veteran named Gaius Stabius Pointius, is designed for close combat. Romans fight up close and personal, where you can see the fear in your enemy's eyes. It builds character. Roman military philosophy emphasizes personal combat over distant warfare. Romans believe that true warriors face their enemies directly, engage in hand-to-hand combat, and settle disputes through superior sword work, rather than elaborate strategic maneuvering. It's honorable, traditional, and frequently fatal for participants. Weapons training is followed by formation drill, where recruits learn to move as coordinated units rather than collections of individuals. Roman military success depends on disciplined teamwork, with soldiers operating as integrated components of larger tactical systems. Individual heroism is discouraged in favor of collective effectiveness. Think of yourself as a gear in a machine, Stabius instructs as recruits practice basic maneuvers. Your job is not to be heroic. Your job is to do what you're told, when you're told, without thinking about whether it makes sense. Thinking is for officers. The training regimen includes marching, lots of marching, across terrain that seems specifically designed to test human endurance. Romans believe that soldiers who can march anywhere can fight anywhere, and Roman armies are famous for their ability to cover vast distances while carrying full equipment loads. Your equipment includes armor that's heavier than it looks, a shield that's larger than seems practical, and enough personal supplies to sustain you during extended campaigns in hostile territory. Roman soldiers are essentially mobile military units who carry their own logistics systems, which explains why Roman armies can operate independently in remote locations for extended periods. A Roman soldier, explains Centurion Hartius during equipment inspection, is prepared for any situation: war, peace, construction projects, tax collection, crowd control, and public entertainment. We're very versatile. After 3 days of intensive training, which Romans consider adequate preparation for military service, your unit receives its deployment orders. You're being sent to join Pompey's forces in what Romans call active service areas, which means places where people are trying to kill Roman soldiers with professional enthusiasm. The march to your deployment area begins at dawn, with your unit joining a larger column of Roman forces, moving across the countryside with the methodical precision that has made Roman armies legendary. Roman military organization ensures that thousands of soldiers can move efficiently across vast distances while maintaining combat readiness and logistical support. The landscape you're marching through is beautiful in the way that remote areas become beautiful when you're too exhausted to appreciate scenery. Rolling hills, ancient forests, and pastoral valleys pass by in a blur of forced marching, rest breaks that are too short, and the gradual realization that military service involves a great deal more walking than anyone had mentioned during recruitment. Your fellow soldiers maintain morale through traditional Roman military activities, complaining about officers, speculating about enemy capabilities, and sharing increasingly creative theories about what sort of combat they'll be facing. Roman soldiers are natural pessimists, who assume that any military situation will be worse than advertised, which helps them maintain realistic expectations about military service. The enemy, explains Gaius Warriarius, a veteran of previous campaigns, always has more soldiers than intelligence reports suggest, better weapons than anyone expected, and terrain advantages that weren't mentioned in the briefing. It's traditional. Roman military intelligence operates on the principle that accurate information is less important than psychological preparation. Soldiers who expect the worst are rarely disappointed by actual combat conditions, which makes them more effective fighters than soldiers who've been told that military service will be easy and safe. Your unit reaches its deployment area just as the sun begins to set, which Romans consider good timing since it allows for immediate combat experience without the inconvenience of extended preparation. The enemy forces, which turn out to be other Romans fighting for different political factions, have positioned themselves across a valley with the sort of defensive preparations that suggest they've been expecting company. Classic Roman tactics, observes Centurion Hartius as he surveys the tactical situation. They're using our own methods against us. It's like fighting ourselves, but with more political complications. Roman civil wars are particularly challenging because both sides understand Roman military tactics, use Roman equipment, and employ Roman organizational methods. Victory depends on superior leadership, better logistics, and the sort of tactical innovations that can overcome enemies who've been trained using identical methods. The battle begins at dawn with the traditional Roman approach: disciplined formation, movement, coordinated attacks, and the application of overwhelming force at decisive points. Your job, as explained by your centurion, is to stay in formation, follow orders, and try not to think too much about the fact that you're fighting people who were probably Roman citizens yesterday. Roman combat is loud, chaotic, and surprisingly brief. Battles that seem like they should last for hours are often decided in minutes, with victory going to whichever side maintains discipline longer. Your role in the battle is essentially to be part of a human machine that advances, retreats, and fights according to signals from officers who presumably understand the larger tactical situation. You advance with your unit across ground that's muddy from recent rain and complicated by the sort of obstacles that make military movement challenging. The enemy responds with their own formation movements, creating the sort of organized chaos that Romans call glorious combat, and that you might describe as professionally orchestrated violence. The actual fighting, when it begins, is nothing like the heroic descriptions in Roman literature. Combat is brief, brutal, and conducted at close range, where personal courage matters less than training, equipment quality, and the ability to function as part of a coordinated unit. Your gladius connects with enemy shields, armor, and occasionally flesh, while you try to remember your training and avoid the natural human tendency to panic when people are trying to kill you. Roman military doctrine emphasizes automatic responses over conscious decision-making, which explains why training focuses on repetitive drill rather than creative thinking. The battle reaches its climax when your formation breaks through the enemy line, creating the sort of tactical advantage that Roman commanders train their entire careers to achieve. Victory follows with the swift inevitability of well-executed military planning, though you're too exhausted and traumatized to appreciate the tactical elegance of Roman warfare. In the aftermath, as you sit among your surviving comrades, while medical personnel treat the wounded and burial details handle the deceased, you reflect on your week in Rome. You've experienced Roman cuisine, Roman bathing, Roman justice, Roman religion, Roman labor practices, and Roman military service. It's been educational in ways that no amount of reading could have prepared you for. Not bad for a first campaign, comments Gaius Servivius, a soldier who's managed to survive multiple conflicts through a combination of skill, luck, and careful attention to self-preservation. You didn't run away, you didn't get anyone killed, and you're still breathing. That's better than average for new recruits. As the Roman sun sets over the battlefield, painting the sky in shades that remind you uncomfortably of the day's early violence, you realize that you've somehow survived a full week in Caesar's Rome. You've learned about Roman civilization from the ground up, experienced their customs firsthand, and gained insights into daily life in the ancient world that few modern people could imagine. Tomorrow, assuming you survive the night and avoid the various medical complications that accompany Roman military service, you'll wake up to another day in the greatest empire the world has ever known. You've lasted 6 days in Caesar's Rome, which is longer than many Romans manage and considerably longer than most foreign visitors. Whether this makes you lucky, skilled, or simply too stubborn to die appropriately is a question that historians will presumably debate for centuries. For now, you're alive, reasonably intact, and thoroughly educated in the realities of ancient Roman life. The experience has been transformative, character-building, and occasionally terrifying, just like Rome itself. And as you drift off to sleep under the Roman stars, surrounded by the sounds of an army settling in for the night, you can't help but wonder what adventures tomorrow will bring in this magnificent, terrifying, endlessly fascinating civilization that has somehow managed to survive your visit. The rats, wherever they are, seem to be laughing again, but you're still here to hear them. And so ends our 6-day journey through Caesar's Rome, where survival was a daily achievement and modern conveniences were merely the distant dreams of future civilizations. Sleep well, knowing that your greatest daily challenges likely don't involve communal toilet sponges, sacred bull's blood, or involuntary military service. Sweet dreams, and remember, things could always be worse. Thank you for joining us on this educational journey through the charming realities of ancient Roman life. We hope you've gained a newfound appreciation for modern conveniences like antibiotics, building codes, and toilet paper that isn't alive. Sweet dreams, and remember, your worst day probably doesn't involve communal sponge toilets or involuntary gladiator training. Sleep well, knowing you're wonderfully, blissfully modern. Now, for those of you who prefer your history with a bit more academic rigor and considerably less creative interpretation, the following section will helpfully clarify which parts of our bedtime story were actual historical facts, and which were merely historically plausible suffering. Historical summary. Our 6-day Roman adventure was grounded in the genuine realities of life in the late Roman Republic, circa 144 BC, when the political system was in its final death spiral and daily survival required considerable skill and luck. Day 1. Housing and Roman diet. Romans of modest means did indeed live in insulae, multi-story tenement buildings that were notorious for their poor construction, frequent collapses and lack of basic amenities. These buildings could reach 6 or 7 stories high, with the poorest residents living on the upper floors, where fire risk was greatest and water access was minimal. The ground floors typically housed shops, taverns or small businesses. Room sizes were genuinely tiny, and thin walls meant privacy was essentially non-existent. Upper floor residents did empty chamber pots out windows into the streets below, a practice so common that Roman law actually addressed pedestrian injuries from falling waste. The Roman breakfast, ciantulum, was indeed simple, typically consisting of bread, sometimes dipped in wine or water, with olives or cheese for those who could afford it. Eggs were primarily eaten at dinner, not breakfast, making our protagonist's request genuinely strange to Roman sensibilities. Bread was often quite hard, and worm infestation in stored grains was a persistent problem. Though water quality in urban areas was compromised, despite the engineering marvels of the aqueduct system, as it became contaminated in storage systems and through lead pipes, fistulae. Gastrointestinal illnesses were common, and visitors from other regions were particularly susceptible to local pathogens. Roman public toilets were genuinely communal affairs, with long marble benches containing multiple holes where users sat side by side. The tersorium, a sponge attached to a stick, was the standard cleaning implement, and these were indeed shared among users and rinsed in buckets of salt water or running water between uses. Day 2. Public baths. Roman thermae were central to social life and operated on the principle of progressing through pools of different temperatures, the frigidarium cold, tepidarium warm, and caldarium hot. Bathers applied olive oil to their skin and scraped it off with a curved metal tool called a strigil, taking dead skin with it. The oil was often reused, and the same pools served hundreds of bathers daily without significant water changes. Baths were indeed breeding grounds for various skin conditions and infections. The hypercast heating system that warmed the floors and walls was a genuine Roman innovation. Massage and various health treatments were standard bathhouse services, though hygiene standards were far removed from modern expectations. Day 3. Crime and urban dangers. The vigiles were Rome's combination police and fire brigade, but they were primarily focused on fire prevention and riot control rather than petty crime. Street crime was common, particularly theft, and foreign visitors were frequent targets. Roman streets lacked systematic lighting, making alleys dangerous after dark. Legal protections varied dramatically based on citizenship status, with foreigners having significantly fewer rights and recourse options. Social hierarchies were strictly maintained. Apologizing to slaves was genuinely shocking behavior that could mark someone as dangerously foreign or socially ignorant. Day 4. Religious practices. Roman religion was deeply embedded in daily life and public festivals. Jupiter Optimus Maximus was indeed the king of the gods and Rome's patron deity. Animal sacrifice was central to major religious ceremonies, with bulls being expensive and prestigious offerings reserved for major festivals. Blood from sacrifices could splatter participants, and this was often interpreted as having religious significance. Roman priests did examine animal entrails, particularly livers, to divine the future, a practice called haruspice, borrowed from Etruscan traditions. Purification rituals were real and could involve public ceremonies with water, oils, and sacred implements, though the specific details in our story are creative interpretations of general Roman purification practices. Day 5. Labor and construction. Roman public works projects did conscript labor from various sources, including foreign workers, debtors, and criminals. Aqueduct construction was a massive undertaking, requiring the movement of enormous stone blocks using human labor, wooden rollers, and rope systems. Working conditions were harsh, with long hours under the Mediterranean sun and minimal safety protections. Workers were provided basic food and shelter, but faced genuine risks of injury, exhaustion, and heat illness. Roman engineering projects were indeed marvels of organization and determination, built through intensive manual labor and sophisticated planning. Day 6. Military service. Roman military conscription was a reality for citizens and could extend to auxiliary forces recruited from non-citizen populations. Military training was intensive but brief by modern standards. New recruits could be deployed after only days or weeks of basic training. The gladius was the standard Roman short sword, designed for close combat in tight formation. Roman military success depended on disciplined formation fighting rather than individual heroism. Civil wars during the late Republic meant Romans frequently fought other Romans, creating complex political and tactical situations. Battle conditions were indeed chaotic, brutal, and often decided quickly, based on which side maintained formation discipline longer under pressure. Historical context: the late Roman Republic, roughly 133 to 27 BC, was a period of increasing political instability, with traditional institutions struggling to govern a vast empire. This era saw the rise of powerful individual leaders like Pompey, Caesar, and Crassus, whose competition for power eventually destroyed the republican system. Daily life continued amid this political chaos, but ordinary citizens faced the uncertainties of civil war, economic disruption, and the breakdown of traditional social structures. Throughout this period, Roman engineering, law, and military organization remained remarkably sophisticated, creating the infrastructure and institutions that would support the later empire. However, daily life for common people involved genuine hardships that modern people would find difficult to endure, from basic hygiene and food safety to workplace conditions and medical care that was primitive by contemporary standards.